Greg, please.
I'm,
First, Greg.
thanks very much for a really excellent presentation. I think you very rightly point out that when one side uses AI-based cyber attack system, the other side will inevitably have to do the same and take the human being out of the loop. And the big danger I see here is one of escalation. Because one of the characteristics of human beings is they know when to pull punches. Right? Even when you've got an advantage, you can see good reasons not to deploy that advantage precisely because of worries about further escalation. So I don't know how how can this escalation problem be handled in fully automated systems where both sides are automated.
Shall we take the other questions also? Aurélie?
Yes, my question is about, a bit linked about what Professor von Braun said before about what is the battlefield and where is it. In fact, because I can imagine, for example, that a country take the control of all the cars, all the autonomous cars of another country. And how do you see the link between private companies that develop such cars and states that have to fight such?
Christoph Peilo.
It was a very interesting talk. However, I think you made implicit assumptions. So you centered very much on the Western perspective. From a more international perspective, it looks totally different. So we as a Western society, being rather on the receiving end of an attack, we offer a large attack surface, and we are fairly easy to attack. So because we open a convenient API for attackers, and this is why we suffer so badly currently from all sort of attackers. However, from their own attack capabilities, then all the problems you mentioned kicked in. I would like to add one feature about the Mayhem system. This was developed by David Brumley, and this system was very well suited for its purpose, since he used a language which is in industrial space also not used at all. He was very disciplined in using functional programming paradigms in avoiding all side effects, basically. And with that sort of systems, you can attack or you can protect military installations, but this is something which can be not used throughout industry or automated driving or whatever. So our Western attack surface is huge, and it would perhaps make sense to make those distinctions clearer in future. But it was a great talk still. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Side effect freeness is a somewhat technical issue. Bruce.
Thank you for the talk. It's very, very interesting. I know that the U.S. has significant restrictions on the deployment of offensive cyber, and that has been seen as a huge weakness in a number of ways, so it skews it towards the attacker. There is also the concern that there is no gradation in understanding that some attacks are less malignant than other attacks. Nation states versus individual actors versus the range of effects. Do you have comments or suggestions on like rating scales, or how you would change policy to level the playing field? Thank you.
Please.
So maybe I'd first address the question about the confines of the battlefield, because I think this is a very important question and also something that I meant to bring up in the presentation but then forgot. One of the major concerns is, of course, when you think about cyber attacks, first of all, where does it start and end when it comes to targets? So especially since you have the attribution problem, are civilian targets such as self-driving cars, for example, if they're not within the military, are they off limits or aren't they off limits? And I think this is a question that of course, from an international law perspective, these civilian targets should be off limits, but I think it's, in a way, much easier to launch these attacks as part of a cyber war and sort of include them in the battlefield. But I mean, as I said, from a legal perspective, this is questionable. And I think another question that goes together with it is, does a cyber attack only lead to a counter attack in cyberspace, or does it actually spill over into the conventional space? And there's a very interesting example from actually 1.5 weeks ago when the Hamas launched a cyber attack on the Israeli Defense Forces. And the Israeli Defense Forces basically replied by first defending in cyberspace against the cyber attack, but then in a second step, they went and bombed the building which hosts the Hamas Cyber Command, or hosted the US cyber. So there we have a clear example of that the boundaries of this battlefield are actually not very clear, not really confined, and I really think this attribution problem is adding a lot of complexity to where we can draw a line and whether it's actually possible. The first question was about the escalation problem. I don't have a good answer, I would say, but I think that this has come up a lot of times with respect to past cyber attacks. So I've mentioned Stuxnet, and I think one of the major concerns, I mean, of course, there is still a lot of details about this particular attack that are not clear, especially also about who exactly was involved in developing it. But from what we know, especially about the US response, is that they were very, very, very concerned about how Iran would respond if they figured out where the origin of this attack is, and that this would actually escalate. And as far as I know, the attack, how it was designed, was not meant to have, at least from the US side, to have the effect that it had in the end, so I think there were different stages of this program, and in the first stages, the Iranians didn't realize that something was happening at all. So only when it reached a certain scale, basically, of effect, the Iranians realized that something was wrong, and I think this was not meant to happen. So I think what was meant to happen from the US side was to sort of disturb the system, but not really to have Iran figure out what was going on. And I think they were very concerned about that this was escalate, and I mean, there were Iranian cyber attacks on US institutions afterwards, but I think this is a very difficult problem to address, how this escalation dynamic actually plays out, especially when AI is in the game. Thank you very much for the comment about the Western perspective. I think this is definitely something that I should take into account when I revised the paper that I wrote. And sorry, can you remind me briefly of the last question?
I was saying that I was thinking of U.S. policy, but a number of nation states have policies that inhibit OCO, offensive cyber operations, and that some people say that puts them at a tactical disadvantage. Yeah. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
On the one hand, I would say, yes, it puts it as a disadvantage. I think the problem is also that there is a lot going on behind the scenes, especially when private actors are getting involved. And I know that there has been a lot of controversy, especially also on the legal side, about what private actors are allowed to do, especially when they cooperate with the state. So I think it is good to have this as an official policy, but I also know that there are limits to it when it comes to really the implementation and the way that this, field is being developed in the US and then also in other countries. And I think it would probably be very difficult to, at least at the moment in the political climate, to develop a doctrine which also allows you to launch offensive cyber attacks. But yeah.
Reconvene. So thank you very much once again. Enjoy the lunch, and let's be back at 2:30.